Welcome to Shaping Science, a collection of videos from the voices that are shaping science today. I'm Alejandra Manjarres from Drug Discovery News, and today we're joined by James Connelly, Chief Executive Officer of My Green Lab. In this episode, we'll explore how sustainability in scientific research is transforming the way labs across academia, biotech, and pharma approach innovation, operational efficiency, and environmental responsibility. From reducing energy consumption and laboratory waste to creating more transparent sustainability standards through initiatives like My Green Lab certification and the ACT Eco label, we'll dive into the ideas and industry shifts shaping the future of sustainable science. So, without any further ado, let's get into it. Hi, James. Thank you so much for joining us today. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. Looking forward to this conversation.
That's great. So, first, a lot of labs still see sustainability as a bottleneck to scientific progress. What are the most persistent myths, and what evidence usually changed even the most skeptical scientific leaders' minds?
Yeah, I think there's still a bit of a perception that by integrating sustainability into their research, they're somehow going to slow down the scientific process itself. And we take a very different approach. Like we understand for researchers that, fundamentally what they're doing in the lab is the science, and they're trying to get the outcomes and results that they're expecting consistently. But there's so much that you can do around the edges that isn't going to impact the underlying science. Like, for example, we recommend that people keep their freezers at minus 70 instead of minus 80. We have a lot of research and data that shows that sample integrity is just as good at minus 70 than minus 80, but you can reduce the energy consumption of those freezers by around 20%. A single ultra low temperature freezer can use as much energy as 2 American homes. So that's a really simple change that actually isn't going to have any negative impact on your research. A lot of the other recommendations we have are about process and efficiency improvements. So things like better organizing your samples, or making sure that you have a really clear inventory tracking system so that you're not ordering more chemicals or products that might go bad or be duplicative of what you already have in your lab. So that only it's about running your lab more efficiently, saving money, saving time, sharing resources across labs, all things that actually might even speed up or make the scientific process more efficient. So I think when we can kind of get people from the mindset of, oh, this is going to be something that's going to slow me down, to really looking at the specific, very practical solutions that we're recommending, then they'll see that actually, hey, there's all these things that I can do around the edges that are going to save money, might actually improve efficiency, and aren't going to impact the underlying research that's going on. So I think there's like that initial fear, but when we can provide really specific examples, get some quick wins, demonstrate the savings, then we can overcome that perception.
Sure. And then, across the thousands of labs My Green has worked with, what separates the teams that truly embed sustainability into scientific excellence from those that treat it like a checkbox exercise?
Yeah, I think, it is a certification, My Green Lab certification at the end, but really what it's intended to be is a continuous improvement process where you're changing the culture of a lab and actually driving innovation across the organization. And what we find is when it moves from sort of a single lab operation into a broader organizational initiative, there's often opportunities for peer-to-peer learning. And some of the solutions that we recommend, or some of the challenges that labs are facing, like how to best manage waste, are actually really difficult to solve at just the lab level itself. You need to get the whole building or a facility or a group of buildings to work together to solve some of these solutions at scale. So while it'll start with individual behavior change, things like checking your inventory before you order new products, or closing your fume hood sash when it's not in use, or chilling up your freezers, really the idea is those small wins build momentum so that you can take on bigger initiatives, like perhaps exploring alternative waste treatment for regulated medical waste. There's some new technologies out there that can reduce the carbon impact of regulated medical waste disposal by 90%. But that's not something you're going to do right away. There's, some capital intensive upfront decisions that you're making. You have to get your waste team involved, your facility team involved. So a lot of the work we do is kind of starting small and then building into, when you get those quick wins, broader organizational initiatives where you're going to get even deeper potential savings. But unless you kind of have a culture where everybody's thinking, they're in a space where they're willing to be innovative, try new things, it's going to be very hard to get those bigger things done. So it's important to start small, build some measurable savings, and then build from there.
Yeah. So now let's talk about Act Ecolabel 2.0. It is an independently verified, science-based sustainability standard for laboratory products that brings more transparency to sustainability data. How does it change conversations among scientists, procurement teams, and suppliers?
Yeah, I think, for a long time in life science, there were a lot of manufacturers that would just put like a little green leaf next to their product and say, this is my green product. There wasn't a consistent definition of what that meant. And then ultimately, consumers couldn't really trust it because it was just determined by the manufacturer themselves. And so, what we've done with ACT is created a consistent level playing field where you can compare apples to apples and make a decision about something like a pipette tip or a HPLC or an ultra low temperature freezer. We're actually comparing verified third-party sustainability data to each other. And so that really changes the game. And it does so for two reasons. One, then the scientist or the procurement person or the lab manager actually has that apples to apples comparison. So they can say, I want to buy this product that has a lower environmental impact factor score than this product because I can see that there's verified impact reductions that's going to reduce the carbon footprint of my laboratory. But actually what happens even more upstream is the manufacturers are looking at all their competitors and their scores. So what we see is just by going through that evaluation process and finding out, which happens, hey, actually, we're not at the score that we want to be. And we actually see manufacturers making significant innovations within their product, within their packaging, with renewable energy purchasing, just through the process of getting their label. So it creates this really virtuous cycle where scientists and procurement have the data they need to make better decisions, and then manufacturers also are able to benchmark and compare themselves, which drives inherent innovation in a virtuous cycle. So both those things were really missing from the market, and having a consistent third-party standard that's broadly adopted and acceptable actually facilitates much better communication and faster market transformation towards more sustainable products.
And maybe now talking about the individual level. So many scientists care deeply about sustainability on a personal level, but don't always see how they can influence change within their organizations. How can sustainability training and leadership programs help turn personal passion into measurable impact?
Yeah, I love that question. I do think most researchers and most people that work in life science understand the climate science. And I think we have a benefit in this industry. We're not faced with a lot of people questioning the underlying climate science and why it matters. But then it becomes, how do you actually implement it in my lab? I think what we really recommend people do is essentially run an experiment. Scientists are data hungry creatures. They exist within institutions and companies where you need data to prove out your hypothesis if you're going to build something from a small program into a bigger program. And that's really how our program's set up. Through implementing My Green Lab certification, which can start without a lot of capital costs, without a lot of time and effort, just with one lab within an organization, then you can demonstrate, here are the things we're doing. And we have a tool called the Impact Estimator that will actually show you the resource savings and the carbon savings and the financial savings from implementing those actions. So then at the end, you actually have not only your certificate, but you have a report of what you accomplished from an environmental and a financial standpoint. That then gives you the opportunity to share that. And it's so often, even within organizations that now have 200 plus labs that have gone through our programs, where it really started with an interested scientist that was fed up with the environmental impact of research, wanted to do something about it, leveraged our tool to get really credible estimates of what their potential savings was. And then that built out a broader culture of sustainability within the lab and within the organization that ultimately now is rolled out across 42 of the top 50 biotech and pharma companies, over 5,300 labs in 60 countries. But it really does start with that interested scientist that has a passion, brings it to their lab, runs an experiment, gets a result, a really credible result because we actually third-party verify it, and then shares that result as a way to build internal excitement and momentum. And one of the things that's been amazing to see is how many times that interested, passionate scientist actually then ends up getting a promotion. And we're even seeing at some of the large pharma companies and at many universities, they're actually creating whole green lab positions. And because that person was the first person to drive the initiative internally, they're the de facto expert for how to drive these initiatives. And so there's a whole new class of researchers with this knowledge and expertise that are actually becoming formal roles, and sustainability is being elevated alongside quality, alongside health and safety, alongside process improvement as a critical functioning aspect of any laboratory.
That's a great advice. Thank you. So finally, how can labs use sustainability readiness to have a competitive advantage in the future?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think maybe the first thing is, always in a lab, you're looking for the best people, and particularly young people, but not just young people. If they are going to work for an organization, and almost all the large life science organizations and universities now have very aggressive corporate sustainability goals, but then they go work in the lab and they're not seeing those values reflected in the day-to-day work, it creates a gap. And I think that gap can really make it feel like maybe people aren't connected to the mission and they're not engaged in the work. So especially companies that are focused on recruiting and retaining top talent, making sure that you're doing the necessary things that people would be doing in their daily lives to reduce environmental impact is a really key way to make sure that you're attracting and retaining top talent. And we've actually had some research come out of some of the large pharma companies that have used our program where they're actually able to see increased employee engagement scores through going through the My Green Lab program. So their employees are not only saving money and saving resources, they're actually more engaged in their job roles. And so if you think about the financial benefit of getting the best people, keeping them for longer, and keeping them more engaged in their jobs, it's significant. I think beyond that, in life science, particularly in drug discovery, which is great to talk to Drug Discovery News, you really can't change something after it's already been approved by the FDA. So the leverage point is actually in the discovery and the scale up. That's when you need to start thinking about incorporating things like green chemistry, or if you're designing a medical device, thinking about sustainability upstream. Then as you're going into the production process, you can not only make something that likely has lower cost, but it's going to have lower environmental impact. But you have to get the scientists involved in that through that culture of innovation and sustainability early on, or once it's approved, it's going to be too difficult to change and too late. So we think about this a lot working with biotech and pharma. If you look at where their carbon footprint is, the majority of it is actually in the production of their medicines. So you would think, well, let's focus on the production of their medicines. Well, there's things you can do there. The challenge is you can't really change a lot of the processes, actually. So you have to be thinking 5 to 10 years ahead. And that's where the researchers in the R&D, in the process chemistry teams come in. And that's why we want to get everybody kind of early on, not only at their university in their first lab roles, but across the whole R&D and QA/QC, as well as production environment within that company. The last thing I would say is there's growing expectations from all of the large customers And this is if you're providing contract research services or you're providing products into the life science market. They expect you to have a net zero target. They expect you to have a high EcoVadis score. And increasingly now, because it's so important to drive the impact of what people are purchasing to achieve their climate targets, they need their vendors to go along with their sustainability expectations. So we run a collaborative with 10 of the largest pharma companies that are actually encouraging and then measuring and incentivizing their contract research and contract development and manufacturing organizations to get My Green Lab certification so they can reduce their impact of what they're purchasing from that customer. So it's a way to distinguish yourself. And the same thing's happening in the lab supply space with ACT. By getting an ACT label, you're able to meet customer expectations, maybe sometimes even exceed or go above customer expectations, and use that to market yourself competitively against your peers. Ultimately, I think a lot of these things will become the cost of doing business. And the way I've seen markets play out here is if you get some of the bigger purchasers to say, hey, if you're going to be a CRO for us, or if you're going to sell us lab supplies, here are our sustainability expectations. So there's also business risk. If you're not stepping up to the plate, you're not a leader in terms of sustainability, you run the risk of actually maybe getting deselected and not having that customer available to you. So there's a lot of really clear business justifications that you can build around approaching sustainability, both in your lab and in your production processes.
This was incredibly insightful, James. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Great, thank you. I enjoyed it.
To learn more about sustainability in scientific research, please click the link in the description. And thank you for watching. Together, we are shaping science.